There was a moment, one single second, when I heard something I wasn't supposed to. That's all it took for my world to collapse. Now, I sit in the dark, inside a crumbling utility room near the border, pressing my ear to the floor to listen for footsteps. Every sound feels like a warning. Every breath I take could be the last one I breathe freely. I used to work with sound for a living, removing the noise, sharpening the message, polishing the voices of men who believed they ruled everything. I spent my days buried in waveforms, adjusting decibels, trimming out silence. Silence used to be my comfort. Now, it's a threat. I should have deleted it. I should have closed the file, scrubbed it clean, and walked away. But something in that voice hidden behind static and laughter stuck with me. A phrase not meant for anyone outside that room. A plan whispered too casually for what it truly meant. I backed it up. Just for reference, I told myself. But then the connection at my apartment died. My government-assigned email locked me out. And the very next morning, 2 men in gray coats stood outside my office, asking if I had experienced technical irregularities. It was then I realized they weren't trying to fix the signal. They were hunting the man who heard it. My name doesn't matter anymore. It was erased the day I stopped being part of the machine. But back then, I was someone. At least, that's what I believed. I worked as a post-production audio engineer for Broadcast Unit 27, a department so secretive, it didn't have a sign on the door. It was buried 3 floors beneath an ordinary-looking building in Pyongyang, accessed only by elevator code and a rotating guard post. Even the air inside felt different, drier, colder, like it knew not to carry sound too far. Our job was to clean and enhance official recordings for the regime. That meant speeches by the supreme leader, ceremonial announcements, internal training videos, or documentaries never meant for public viewing. I wasn't a journalist, a soldier, or a propagandist. I was the man who ensured there was no echo when Kim Jong-un's voice bounced off the marble walls of a conference hall. I smoothed out coughs, masked the accidental stumbles, even inserted faint applause when the real room had been too quiet. I was good at it. Quiet, invisible, reliable. For that, I was rewarded. A 2-room apartment in Pyongyang with power almost every night. Access to imported tea and real sugar. My wife received extra ration coupons. My son got placed into an elite math class, something we were told was only possible for families with clear background. We weren't rich, not in the way people from the Central Committee were, but we were trusted. That was a different kind of currency, and I believed in it. I believed we were serving something bigger than ourselves. I didn't care about politics. I didn't ask what happened to people who stopped showing up. I wasn't curious about where the noise went when we erased it from the tapes, because the less you asked, the more secure you stayed. I had colleagues who used to drink too much, make jokes about certain officials, whisper things after hours. They didn't last. Some were transferred. Some simply vanished. I learned early that the smartest thing you could do was keep your mouth and your mind on your work. And for 10 years, that's exactly what I did. I lived in a clean apartment, with clean hands, cutting the noise from other people's voices. Until one day, I heard something that wouldn't let go. There was something comforting about routine. The same walk to work each morning, past the bronze statue in the square where children bowed with robotic grace. The same guard at the basement checkpoint, who never smiled but always nodded once. The same hallway with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects. Inside the studio, I sat at a sound console, with more buttons than anyone needed, and screens that blinked in silent rhythm. Every morning, a junior officer would deliver a stack of drives, labeled with red ink, and initials KJU, speech, Panmunjom, Gen, command, training, film, 32, and so on. No context, no questions. Just files to clean. My job was mechanical. I'd isolate vocal frequencies, eliminate background noise, clip out stutters or coughs, and occasionally dub in pre-recorded applause or patriotic music cues. Once, I was asked to make a crowd cheer louder than it had in real life. I didn't ask why. I just layered the sound. I took pride in my precision. I liked the silence between edits, the control I had over sound. In a country where words could kill, I made those words sound perfect. At home, things were modest but steady. My wife worked as an office administrator for a government ration bureau. Secure, boring, safe. Our son, Hojin, was bright, quiet, and obsessed with drawing maps. He'd sketch the country by memory, every mountain range and province border. Once, he asked why the maps he saw at school never showed the world beyond China. I told him to focus on what he could see, not what he couldn't. We had meat in our soup once a week. Our power outages were short. We even had a working radio with 3 channels, 2 from Pyongyang, 1 from Kaesong. I'd sit and adjust the antenna just to catch the clearest signal, more out of habit than interest. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was stable. In North Korea, stability was everything. Those who had it clung to it like gold. You learned to live in a narrow corridor of thought, where obedience meant safety, and curiosity meant danger. I knew the limits. I accepted them. And in return, I was left alone. For years, I lived in that careful silence, until the silence spoke back. It started like any other file, just another speech to clean. The label on the drive read, Economic Planning Summit, Final Audio B. The B designation usually meant a secondary recording, a backup, or sometimes an extended version captured before and after the official event. We often received these when the primary audio had technical issues. I loaded the file and put on my headphones. The usual voices filled the room, booming declarations about agricultural quotas, cement production targets, national pride. I adjusted the EQ, trimmed a few gaps, routine work. But something odd caught my attention at the 42-minute mark. A faint shuffle, followed by laughter, unfiltered, unstructured. This wasn't part of the speech. I rewound, isolated the channel, and ran a frequency sweep to eliminate static. What emerged chilled me. 2 voices, men. One I recognized from past recordings as Deputy Chairman Ryu of the Economic Commission. The other unidentified. They weren't speaking to an audience. This was a private exchange, captured accidentally before the event began. The conversation started casually. Complaints about the length of the session. Jokes about the catering. Then it turned sharp. He's becoming too loud, one voice said. He's attracting too much sympathy. It's making the chairman nervous. Then he needs to be managed, the other replied. Like we did with the uncle? Silence. Then, a low laugh. I stopped the track. My fingers hovered over the keys. I played it again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In those few words, I had stumbled onto something lethal. A plan, or perhaps a decision already made, to remove a high-ranking official, possibly an ally of the supreme leader himself. They were speaking in code, but the meaning was clear. Like we did with the uncle. Everyone knew what that meant. Jang Song-thek. Arrested publicly, executed quietly, erased completely. I stared at the waveform on the screen. My training told me to trim the noise, delete the segment, and move on. That's what I was paid to do. But my instincts hesitated. This wasn't a cough or a stutter. This was evidence of a purge in progress. I told myself I would just save the clip for technical reference. I copied the raw audio onto a hidden folder in my workstation. Then, before leaving that day, I transferred it to a small encrypted drive I kept on my keychain. A habit from earlier projects. Harmless. I convinced myself it meant nothing, that no one would notice. But someone did. The next morning, my home internet was down. Not just slow dead. When I called the technician hotline, the voice on the other end told me my account had been suspended for administrative review. No explanation. At work, my access to the central archive was revoked. My system logins failed twice, then locked me out. When I asked the floor manager, he frowned and told me, "There's a review of internal protocols, temporary." And that afternoon, two unfamiliar men in gray coats arrived at the editing suite. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. They simply watched me work in silence. I knew then, the silence I had once mastered was turning against me. The idea of escape had never seriously entered my mind before that week. Like most people in Pyongyang, I had heard the rumors of brokers, of border crossings, of disappearances that ended in either freedom or death. But those stories were always someone else's. People from the countryside. Desperate people. Not people like me. But the silence around me had shifted. It wasn't quiet, it was watching. That was the difference. At night, I unplugged every device in our apartment. I whispered even in my own home. I stopped bringing my son to school and told my wife we had to send him to stay with her sister for a few weeks. She asked no questions. She'd grown up in the type of family that never asked questions. It was a former colleague who gave me the name. Someone he'd known years ago before he vanished from our unit. "If you ever find yourself in real trouble," he once said, "look for a man called Chil Nam in Sinuiju. He knows how to disappear people." That name became my only lead. I filed for temporary leave from work, citing recurring migraines and vision trouble. Something difficult to diagnose, hard to refute. The application went through in a day, surprisingly fast. Almost too fast. That terrified me. Packing was dangerous. I couldn't take anything that looked suspicious. I hid the encrypted USB drive deep inside the battery compartment of a broken music player, something that wouldn't draw attention during a search. Cash was nearly impossible to get in Pyongyang. So I brought cigarettes and ginseng powder, tradable commodities in the countryside. To reach Sinuiju, I had to leave the capital without a travel permit. That meant disguises, bribes, and long walks along train tracks at night. I boarded a freight train out of a service depot by pretending to be a technician. I carried a rusted toolbox and didn't speak unless spoken to. The train took me as far as Cheongju. From there, I traveled by foot, hiding in irrigation ditches and under trucks at checkpoints. I learned to sleep with one eye open and my ears tuned to the sound of dogs. 3 days later, I reached the outskirts of Sinuiju, a damp, rust-stained city, crouching on the banks of the Yalu River, staring silently at the Chinese skyline just beyond. It felt close enough to touch, but the river was wide, fast, and watched. I found Chilnam behind a fish stall, gutting carp with a knife that looked older than both of us. I didn't say my real name. I just told him, "A friend from Pyongyang told me you help people leave." He looked me over, pausing at my shoes. "You don't look like someone who wants to leave. You look like someone who's running from something." I said nothing. He nodded. "The river's no joke," he warned. "And the soldiers here are jumpy. Someone got caught last week trying to swim it with a plastic bag of rice tied to his back. They shot him. Took the rice. I asked how much. He gave me a price in trade. 3 cartons of cigarettes, 1 bottle of herbal tonic, and the music player." I hesitated. The drive was in there. My only copy. He saw my expression and shrugged. "You want to live, or you want to listen?" That night, I made the exchange. But before I handed it over, I removed the drive in secret and slipped it into my sock. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. He gave me instructions. "Tomorrow night, 2 hours after dark, be under the iron bridge. Follow the boy in the red cap." That was it. I spent the next 24 hours in a decaying storage room above a shuttered print shop. The floor creaked when I shifted. Rain fell all day, heavy and punishing, masking every other sound. It was both a blessing and a curse. At the appointed time, I crept to the bridge. The boy appeared. No older than 15. with hands too big for his arms. He didn't speak, just motioned, and I followed. We crawled through a drainage tunnel, the water freezing and fast. It emptied us into a shallow inlet behind a pile of rusted metal. From there, we sprinted across mudflats toward the river's edge. A flat-bottomed boat waited, just large enough for two. He rowed. I held my breath. Halfway across, a spotlight swept the water. We froze. Then came the sound, a shouted command, unintelligible, followed by a sharp crack, a rifle firing in the dark. The boy didn't flinch. He rowed harder. By the time we reached the Chinese side, I was soaked, shaking, and barefoot. We climbed onto the bank and ran. No words, just running. He left me in an alley beside a noodle shop and disappeared. I never saw him again. I stayed hidden for 2 nights, surviving on tap water and stolen bread crusts. On the 3rd day, I approached a church I'd heard whispered about in refugee circles, a small, unmarked building known for helping people like me. They took me in, fed me, let me sleep. One of the elders was a Korean-Chinese man who used to work as a translator for missionaries. He asked no questions, just looked me in the eye and said, "You came from the other side, didn't you?" I nodded. He called a contact in Dandong, arranged for me to be transported further inland, then smuggled south through Laos. The USB never left my body during the journey. I hid it in shoes, belts, soap bars. It felt less like a key to the truth, and more like a ticking bomb I didn't know how to defuse. But it was all I had left to prove that I once existed, and that someone in that marble room had spoken a truth so dangerous it nearly killed me just to hear it. The plane landed at Incheon Airport, just before dawn. I remember looking out the window as the city lights spread beneath us like a circuit board. Perfect. Endless. Glowing. Even before stepping off the plane, I could feel the difference in the air. It was warmer, cleaner, free. I had crossed more than just a border. I had stepped into another world. At immigration, a woman with kind eyes greeted me in Korean. But it wasn't the Korean I was used to. It was faster, smoother, full of foreign phrases. I struggled to respond. She noticed and switched to slower speech, gently guiding me through the process. No shouting, no suspicion, just patience. They took me to a facility outside Seoul, Hanwon. I had heard of it only in whispers. Rumors passed between the desperate. That's where they teach you how to be South Korean. The building was clean, bright, full of windows. Real windows. Not the frosted glass we had in Pyongyang's offices. My room had its own light switch, a hot shower, and a bed with sheets so white I was afraid to touch them. The first morning, I cried brushing my teeth. Not because of sadness, but because the tap water was safe to drink. Cold and clean. I didn't need to boil it. Every day at Hanwon, they taught us things that felt alien. How to use an ATM. How to ride the subway. How to recognize scams. What a cell phone contract meant. What taxes were. They showed us a video on freedom of speech. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. They also taught us how to cope. Group therapy sessions were held in small rooms with circular chairs. At first, I stayed silent, listening to others tell stories of torture, hunger, betrayal. Then one day, a woman who had crossed with her children described how her youngest still screamed in the night whenever he saw a uniform. That's when I spoke for the first time since arriving. I told them about the recording. Not the details, never the names. Just that I had heard something I wasn't meant to. That I had kept it. That it had hunted me. The room fell silent. Then one of the counselors, a middle-aged man with quiet eyes, said, "Truth is heavy. That's why so few people carry it." They offered me help, not just food and clothing, but legal assistance, psychological care, even job training. I couldn't imagine editing audio again, not after what I'd heard. But I still had skills. I still knew how to listen. 3 months later, I left Hanawan with a temporary ID, a bank card, and a modest apartment in a satellite town outside Seoul. I stood in the middle of that empty room, surrounded by working appliances, a real refrigerator, a microwave. I pressed buttons just to hear the beeps. Everything felt unreal. The first time I walked into a convenience store, I froze. So many choices, too many lights. I picked up a bag of chips, stared at it for 5 minutes, and left without buying anything. Freedom was overwhelming. At night I lay in bed, unable to sleep, not because I was afraid of being watched but because no one was watching. The silence was different here. It wasn't threatening. It was empty. I started writing again, keeping notes. Not of what had happened, but of how it felt. I wasn't ready to share the recording, not with the media, not with anyone. It remained hidden, tucked away in a small lockbox beneath my bed. Sometimes I would take it out, plug it into an old laptop I bought secondhand, and play just the first few seconds. Not to hear their voices, but to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that it really happened, that I wasn't imagining the fear. In time, I found work. A small radio production company took me in. I started with basic editing, public service announcements, local interviews. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of perfecting lies, I was now shaping truth. The transition was far from smooth. I flinched when someone knocked. I panicked when my internet briefly cut out. But slowly, I began to breathe more fully. One day, walking through Seoul Station, I saw a group of children laughing, taking selfies, chasing each other around the fountain. None of them looked over their shoulders. None of them worried who was listening. I stood there for a long time, watching. That's when I knew. I had crossed more than a river. I had crossed into life. It's been 2 years since I crossed that river. I no longer wake up sweating at 3 a.m. Not every night, at least. My son now knows the word freedom, not as a slogan, but as something you live. He's learning to draw maps again, but this time, he draws the whole world, not just the shape of a country that once trapped his father. I still work with sound, still sit behind a console, still wear headphones, still chase clean audio. But the silence here is different. It isn't the kind that suffocates. It doesn't watch you from the walls. It doesn't make you question whether you're human. Sometimes, I think about the file. It's still there, still hidden. I've never shown it to anyone. Not the authorities, not journalists, not even my wife. People ask if I will ever release it. Use it to expose, to accuse, to ignite something. But what would it change? The people who whispered those words in that marble room, they've likely been replaced, or elevated, or erased. The regime doesn't tremble because of proof. It survives because it knows most people will never hear the signal. And yet, I keep it. Not for revenge, not for justice, but to remind myself that I once heard the truth, and that I chose not to be a part of the lie anymore. Some nights, I still put on my headphones, just to listen to silence, to appreciate what it feels like when it isn't hiding something, when it's just quiet. I was told to clean up the noise, but I found the signal. And though it almost cost me my life, it gave me something I never had before, the courage to hear myself. Now, when I press record, it's no longer for them. It's for me.